G'day mate, 40 here. So, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, has told Republicans not to use the DEI attack on Kamala Harris. Don't call her the DEI candidate, diversity, equity, inclusion candidate. Now, Kamala Harris is the diversity, equity, inclusion candidate. But when you're mounting a political line of attack, truth isn't necessarily the best defense or the best reason to use a particular line of attack. So I read all these books about the 2020 election with regard to the sections on Kamala Harris, and it's clear that Joe Biden selected her as part of the Democrats' diversity, equity, inclusion, race, and sex agenda. Right? Joe Biden wanted a female president, and then in the summer of George Floyd, he wanted a woman of color, and he made it clear he was choosing between 4 black women. He was going to make his vice presidential pick from among 4 black women. And Kamala Harris's team exercised really sharp elbows. Right? They drove out Karen Bass. They leaked all sorts of devastating material about Karen Bass, who's now the mayor of Los Angeles. Kamala Harris also made clear to Gavin Newsom that she did not want Karen Bass selected to fill her Senate seat as Kamala rose to the Joe Biden presidential ticket. So Kamala's team has sharp elbows, man. They know how to throw a punch. Kamala Harris has consistently demonstrated a terrific ability to go on the offense and to throw punches and to brawl. She has a lot of self-confidence, and she's got good prosecutorial chops as far as mounting a case. And she's not going to be an easy candidate to defeat this November. But Kamala Harris is clearly the Democrats' diversity, equity, inclusion pick. Right, Joe Biden clearly chose her because to meet the identity politics agenda of the Democrats and to win the campaign, right, they were going to go with a black woman as the vice president to juice the black turnout. So the various books on the 2020 election make it clear that Kamala Harris was primarily chosen to win the election. Right, she wasn't primarily chosen because she was the best candidate, because she would be the most effective vice president, because she'd be so awesome in helping to govern. Right, Kamala Harris, during her 2 years in the United States Senate, did not show much interest in governing. She took the Barack Obama strategy of looking for TV sound bites. And so she would decline to meet with candidates nominated by Republicans and then just attack them during nomination hearings with particularly provocative questions and sound bites. And so Kamala Harris came to a lot of people's attention through the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and other hearings where she got in juicy sound bites. But she wasn't particularly interested in getting to know Washington, D.C., right? She wasn't forming bonds with other members of Congress, right? She wasn't really learning how Washington, D.C. works. She was there to get on TV. She wasn't interested in learning about how to govern. She wasn't interested in forming alliances. She wasn't interested in working across the aisle. She wasn't interested in making the Department of Homeland Security more secure. She wasn't interested in the nuts and bolts of government. She was interested overwhelmingly in getting on television, right? Getting juicy sound bites on TV to break through to people's level of attention. And so, thanks to her effective rhetorical practices during nomination hearings, she got on TV a lot, and she developed star quality among many Democrats. But she doesn't particularly have a core. Right? She kept changing her slogans. changing the reasons why she was running for president in 2020. Right? There doesn't seem to be any political core to Kamala Harris. It's overwhelmingly about her own self-advancement. There's no animating, governing principle to Kamala Harris. Right? When you boil down what animates Kamala Harris, you get down to insecurity. Right? That's what drives her. This desperate need to achieve external validation to make up for the emptiness she feels inside. So she's always performing to gain that external validation, but there's no coherent inner core that guides her beyond just the search for more and more external validation. So in political scientist James Barber's categorization, he wrote the book on presidential character, she's an active negative, right? She's looking for external validation, getting on TV, getting news media attention to make up for the emptiness that she feels inside. And there are a lot of politicians like that. Where am I from? I'm from Australia, mate, fair dinkum. And right now I'm walking through Westwood beside the UCLA campus. So Richard Nixon was like this too. He was seeking that external validation to shore up his own insecurity and anxiety. And so Kamala Harris is going to reach for that which gives her the most attention. She is going to be pushed and pulled by the breeze. So there's a little breeze through the leaves right now, and you see the leaves moving in this gentle breeze. Well, that's Kamala Harris, because there are no principles that drive her that are discernible at this rate. So she was raised by a couple of communists. Both of her parents were Marxists, and they met at civil rights demonstrations. And her father was a black guy from the Caribbean who became, I think, the first tenured black economist at Stanford University. And his economics research was based on the Marxist communist principles. And her mother was a scientist. Again, her political philosophy is guided by Marxist communist principles. So that's Kamala Harris's background. And she has moved towards the center to be able to receive more adulation, more popularity, have success, like more external validation to prop herself up as a person. And so this is where you see her freeze so often, because she's something of a empty vessel. And she's good on script, but because of her deep insecurity, she will tend to freeze when she goes off script. She doesn't handle news conferences well. She doesn't handle the spontaneous well. She just gets into these awkward mannerisms, the nervous laughter, the weird hand motions. Right? This is a person who's fundamentally ill at ease with herself. Now, this has driven her and her sister to great success in life. So if you're fundamentally ill at ease, striving for external validation, you can achieve a great deal of success in life, right? She has a solid chance of becoming the next president of the United States, right? Probably a 40% chance. But you're seeing someone who is not at ease with herself, so that's why she makes other people uncomfortable. Right? Few Democrats would have looked to Kamala Harris to be their nominee in 2024. It's just that particular circumstances broke this way. It's just easier to go with Kamala Harris after Joe Biden has stepped back from running. But when other people are uncomfortable around you, right, they are reflecting something in you. And other people are not comfortable with Kamala Harris. She tends to use people. She burns through staff. Right, she's not able to maintain loyalty because she just has a highly instrumental perspective on staff. Fairly similar to Donald Trump, except he has been able to maintain people working for him a lot longer than Kamala Harris. So she's a more extreme version of Donald Trump. And she exhibits great caution in her political stands. Right? She's quite reluctant to take any position that might cost her. So this partly results, she's not driven by any internal principles, but it also comes from her insecurity, doesn't want to receive negative feedback, is driven out of her mind when she gets negative feedback. And so she, as much as possible, she avoids taking any stands. She just wants to kind of go with the flow. And in some races, she's positioned herself to the right of the Democrat that she was challenging, such as when she ran for district attorney of San Francisco. And then in the 2020 campaign, she couldn't make up her mind whether she wanted to run as a moderate or if she wanted to run as a progressive. And she kept ricocheting back and forth. And so because she's unable to maintain staff, because she treats people badly, she's not a decisive leader. She does not treat people well. She's not a good manager. So when the Biden team selected her as the vice president for the 2020 race, they insisted that she had to take on Biden staff because it was clear from Kamala Harris's failed 2020 attempt to win the Democratic nomination that she's a terrible manager, she's terrible with staff, so she had to take on Biden staff. And she's tried during her 3.5 years as vice president to build up her own staff, but she can't keep them around. They just keep dropping off. Because in the end, it boils down to her and her leadership style, lack of leadership. And because of her insecurity, when she makes mistakes, when things don't go well, she can't handle the insecurity. She wants to offload it onto someone else. This is what drives a great deal of gaslighting. People can't stand how they feel, and so they blame you. And they say, you're responsible. You did this. You didn't prepare me. So the staff would do everything they could to prepare Kamala Harris, but she wouldn't show up. She wouldn't do the work. And then her ignorance would be exposed. So there's a recklessness at the core of Kamala Harris. There's a lack of conscientiousness, and there's a delusion because in her own autobiography, she portrays herself as highly conscientious, but she's clearly not. So there's a considerable level of delusion, which means she keeps getting humiliated. Like, why do we get humiliated? Why do I get humiliated when I get out of touch with reality? When I'm not taking into adequate consideration the effect of my behavior on other people, right? Other people will then push back. They'll step on my toes. After I step on their toes, they'll push back, and I'll get humiliated because I haven't been in reality. And so Kamala Harris tends to live in a great deal of delusion. She has a vastly exaggerated sense of her own capacity for conscientiousness. And then reality trips her up again and again and again and again. She gets humiliated, such as that Lester Holt interview on NBC, where he said, have you been to the border? And her response, why does that matter? She's given a task to look at the underlying causes of illegal immigration, but she doesn't want to go to the border because that will call attention to the large number of people crossing the border, and it will make her and the Biden administration look bad. So she was highly reluctant to take on any task that would reflect ill on her, because she's all about the presentation and about her status and her image as opposed to the substance of governing. Now, it appears that her natural inclinations are much more aligned with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party than the moderate wing. But she has campaign professionals running her current campaign, so you see them tacking towards the center to try to win the campaign. But just as with Barack Obama in his first scene, he governed pragmatically and moderately. But then in his second term, right, he gave more free rein to his black identity impulses, and we got the rise of Black Lives Matter, we got the Ferguson effect, we got the unleashing of a vast increase in violent crime, and we got incentives given to the police to back off from doing their job, so police do fewer traffic checks. As a result, we get more reckless driving, more driving deaths, more pedestrian deaths. So we have tens of thousands of extra unnecessary deaths in this country because Barack Obama created incentives during his second term for the police to do less of their job and spend more time in the donut shop. And the rise of Black Lives Matter in 2020, right, and the news media elite and the corporate elite and the political elite, right, joining forces to support Black Lives Matter created further incentives for police to back off on doing their job. And so we had an explosion of crime, explosion of illegal immigration, quality of life is degraded in the United States, and Kamala Harris was raising money to bail out criminals associated with Black Lives Matter riots, people who'd burned down police buildings and created mass destruction across America in these Black Lives Matter riots, and Kamala Harris wanted to bail them out. That's her agenda, right? She wants to achieve equality of outcomes, right? She would support reparations if she can get away with supporting reparations. She wants to reduce an emphasis on excellence and instead promote affirmative action, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with less excellence, we're going to have a lot more deaths. We're going to have a lot more crime. We're going to have more traffic fatalities, pedestrian deaths, likely have more plane crashes, more medical malpractice. We just have more malpractice throughout society with a reduced emphasis on excellence. So Kamala Harris is the diversity, equity, inclusion candidate, but it's not necessarily a good political attack line because she is qualified, she is intelligent, she is capable, she is a formidable candidate. She ran the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. She was Attorney General in California for 2 terms, in addition to being a U.S. Senator. So smart, qualified, capable woman, but her agenda is to do more pushing diversity, equity, inclusion, and affirmative action than any other presidential candidate from any of the major parties. And she's made sure to surround herself by people with that similar affirmative action, diversity, equity, inclusion mindset. She doesn't love our cops, our law enforcement. Have I seen Venezuela? Yeah, the quality of life there is horrible, right? So if you want to bring in a quality of life akin to Venezuela, right, then electing Kamala Harris, you'll have more affirmative action, diversity, equity, inclusion, less emphasis on merit, and a brutal game of black, brown identity politics to lower standards and change standards away from rewarding people doing that which is pro-social, right? If you want to have high living standards, social cohesion, social trust, you need to have incentives for people to behave right, to avoid drugs, to work hard, to be able to reap the rewards of their own good deeds, and to accept the punishment for their own bad deeds. Just as with an invasion of your country, you need to be able to punish the people who invade your country. So theoretically, thousands of narco-terrorists could invade the United States through the southern border and kill thousands of American citizens. The reason they don't do that is because the American armed forces blowback will be so severe that the narco groups know that they'd be wiped out in the American response. And so too with Hamas and Hezbollah, right? Unless Israel fights back, slaughters Hamas fighters, and probably takes over parts of Gaza and annexes it to Israel. The only language that Islamic terrorists understand is the loss of land. And so if Israel just accepts an invasion such as what happened on October 7 and doesn't retaliate, and then as a consequence, say, take over a third of Gaza, annex it to Israel, just as after the Six-Day War, 1967, when you had about 6 Arab armies launching into Israel. Israel struck back, defeated them, and took land. And Israel would be very difficult to defend without the West Bank. So it's definitely in Israel's national security interests, its social cohesion interests, its high social capital interests, its economic interests to push out as many of the Arab Islamic residents of Gaza and the West Bank, because the presence of 2, 3, 4 million Arabs who hate the Jewish state and want it dead does not enhance the quality of life in the Jewish state, doesn't enhance the economy or national security. And so for the past 9 months, Israel has allowed Hezbollah to drive away about 100,000 Israelis from living in northern Israel. Israel has allowed Hezbollah to effectively shrink the living space in the Jewish state of Israel, and unless Israel responds with overwhelming force, not just against Hezbollah, but also against the nation state that allowed Hezbollah to dominate there, Lebanon, right? You can't just go after the terrorists, you also have to attack and punish those who provided a home for the terrorists. And unless Lebanon pays a price, unless Gaza pays a price, then you can have more invasions. And unless criminals pay a stiff price for their criminal behavior, you can have more criminality. And so it's one of the fundamental differences between the left and the right, is that the right wants to punish criminals, particularly violent criminals. So pretty much every elected Republican congressman is more in favor of strong law enforcement and punishment of criminals compared to virtually every elected Democratic congressman. There are very few elected Democratic politicians in the United States in any major position who favor the death penalty, while it's probably the majority opinion among Republicans, right? And that's the way you say that murder is terrible, by how you punish it. And by standing up for capital punishment, you're saying that murder, the killing of innocents, is horrific, and killing an innocent person is about the worst thing you can do, and so you should have to pay the ultimate price with your life. And there's a big difference between killing and murder. Murder is the killing of innocent people. Killing is just killing. So I noticed the Times, the London Review of Books had an article on Donald Trump's violent rhetoric, but much of his violent rhetoric was for punishment of criminals. It was for punishment of people who've done horrendous things, people who crossed into the United States illegally, people who were disrupting his rallies. All right. Wanting the punishment of people who are disrupting and destroying and devastating and raping and pillaging and murdering the lawful residents of your country is not just some generic call for violence. It's a call for a restoration of law and order through the stern punishment of people who disrupt order. So most of Donald Trump's quote-unquote violent rhetoric is in support of the restoration of order. It's for the removal of people who are disrupting his rallies. You don't have constitutional right to shout down a speaker or to disrupt a gathering. And so Donald Trump hasn't been perfect in this area, but he's far more of a law and order candidate than Kamala Harris.